years ago, Family Dollar or Dollar General, one of those discount places, had these flashback handheld consoles for the Atari 2600. And so I bought one of these shortly after Christmas when they went on clearance. They were like $10 or something like that. And as I sat down and started to play these games again, I realized how much I loved them. Now, some of the games I had continued to play on emulators for a long time. Adventure and Adventures of Tron, and a lot of those Tron games that are available, I kept playing always because, you know, I really like Tron. But some of the other games I had forgotten about until I started playing them on here. Now, I know a lot of purists don't like the AtGames machines. The sound isn't 100% correct. Some of the pixels aren't in the perfect position. But for me, I just like to play them. I just like playing games. And for playing games, this is a great little device to have. Now, some people can say, hey, why not just download them on your phone? You can get an emulator on your phone and play them there. Why bother with one of these machines? But honestly, I like having a dedicated machine to play on. Because if someone calls and I need my phone to talk on the phone, then I can play games on this while I'm talking on the phone. I can mess around with this while my phone is doing other stuff. My computer, when it's processing video and things like that, I can sit and play on here, and I don't have to worry about trying to play on my computer while the computer is doing other stuff. I like having a dedicated machine. But anyway, as I was playing with this the other day, I was thinking about the fact that, you know, there are a lot of games on there. Some people just don't ever give a chance. Some people have never played. Some people don't realize how many games there really are worth playing on here. But I thought a top 10 list would be a fun way to look at some of those games. What are my personal favorites, my top 10 on the Atari 2600? So here we go. We're going to take a look at my top 10 games from the Atari 2600.
Okay, Atari, let's see your best pitch.
You're out, Rose.
The Atari 2600 was my first game system. I was about 5 or 6 years old when we got our Atari 2600, and I absolutely loved the thing. Now, I know nowadays we look back on it and we say, man, those graphics were so bad, they were so chunky and clunky and cheesy, and you compare it to other things like the ColecoVision and the Intellivision, and it looks so basic and so bad in comparison, but honestly, at the time, I didn't care. I loved my Atari 2600, and now even as an adult, I love to go back and play a lot of those games. The Atari 2600 had a lot of great hits, and even some of the games that didn't have the best graphics still had fantastic gameplay. And me, I've always cared more about playing a fun game than necessarily having the best graphics on the market. In fact, I keep buying a lot of these remake systems, the flashbacks, the handheld systems, the plug-and-play TV things, and the compilations that come on the modern consoles because I love playing these games. So I thought it might be fun to take a look back at what I felt were some of the best games on the system. Now, I did rank these as a top 10, but let's be honest. If you ask me again in the year, I might rank these a little bit differently, but probably the top 2 or 3 will always stay the same. Once you get into like the top 5, those will more likely swap around a little bit more. I do want to point out though, I do like E.T. Even though a lot of people hate this game and say it's one of the worst games of all time, I actually find that it can be enjoyable if you know what you're doing and spend some time actually sitting down to play it. However, the version of Pac-Man on Atari 2600, I wouldn't want that on my worst enemy. So, anyway, let's get into taking a look at what are some of the top games of all time on the Atari 2600.
Vanguard is here, only from Atari.
Now, Adventures of Tron is based upon one of the greatest cinematic masterpieces of all time. Bachelor Party. No, Tron, of course Tron. I love Tron. Tron's one of my favorite movies, and that's part of the reason why I love this game, but also it's really fun. Now, in this game, you control Tron, going up and down on these platforms, using the elevators to fly up and down collecting the bits. When you collect enough bits, you can hop in the I.O. tower and move to the next level where things are harder. And you have to avoid things like the recognizers, the tanks, and the grid bugs that come out and try to get you. And it's one of these things where you're collecting, you're dodging, you're jumping, you're going up and down and trying to get to the next level. Pretty basic platformer for the day. but it's a lot of fun, and it's one of those games that you can really get into as each level gets more difficult and gets more and more frenzied, and you just find yourself going nuts playing this game. After Mattel lost the Tron license, they basically let it lapse after a couple years, they re-released the game as Adventures on GX12. And even though it has the same artwork, and there's obviously the same Tron artwork on here, it was just supposedly a totally different game. Adventures on GX12. Yep, that's totally not Adventures of Tron, even though it totally is. But this game is a lot of fun. It's a great platformer, and it's worth checking out. And a lot of people skip it because they go, it's a movie tie-in. I don't know that I really want to play it. Even if you're not a great fan of Tron, it really is a great platformer, and it's worth your time. Haunted House is a game that can be really confusing to people, especially in this day and age when you're buying loose carts or downloading random ROMs and you don't get a game manual to tell you what to do. You see a game with some floating eyeballs going from blob to blob and getting attacked by monsters, and you're wondering, what the heck am I supposed to be doing here? Well, Haunted House is actually a game about 3 pieces of this urn, and the urn is scattered throughout the haunted house. You're trying to find them and collect them in order to, I don't know, rebuild the urn, because Grandma's ashes are important. I don't remember exactly why, but you're trying to collect the pieces of this urn, and you can't see in the haunted house. So all you can see are the walls, and occasionally you can see the monsters as they get close to you. Now, one way that you can peek is to use one of your matches. And using one of your matches lights up the area around you, and it makes it easier to see. But there are versions of the game you can play in the harder difficulties where you can't have the matches, or you can't even see the walls. It makes it very difficult. But that's part of the fun of a game like this. Now, it's random every time you play, so you can't just remember the maps and play the game over and over by following the pattern. It's one of those games that you really have to go in and explore, and that's part of the fun. Now, these blobs are supposed to be the rooms in a top-down view, and it actually works if you let yourself go with it. Somewhere in here you can find a magical scepter, and when you have the scepter, that allows you to survive being attacked by some of the monsters. The problem is, once you have that scepter, you can't grab a hold of the keys, and you need the keys to unlock certain doors to get into new areas, so you do have some inventory management going on here. So there is some extra thinking and strategy to do while playing this game. So a lot of people will take this game, they'll plug it in, turn it on, whatever, and then they just give up after 30 seconds because they can't figure out what they're supposed to be doing. But once you know what you're doing, you can find that this is actually a pretty deep game, and one that's a lot of fun. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably know Dig Dug already, and there's really no need to go through the gameplay, but for the sake of argument, let's say that you've never played the game before, never heard of it, so let's do a quick rundown. You're digging through the earth. You're fighting monsters, Puka and Fygar. Fygar can breathe fire. They can turn into ghosts and travel towards you, and if they get you, you're dead. So how can you defend yourself? You have an air pump, of course. You will pump them full of air until they explode, or you can drop a rock on their head. Now, the Atari 2600 version is kind of ugly. And really, let's face it, the graphics on the 2600 were never anything great to write home about. Here's the great thing about the game. The gameplay is intact. This is the arcade game here in, well, Atari 2600 form. If you love the game, and I'm one of those who really does love the game, then this is a great version of the game to play on the 2600 because all the arcade action is here. Some people like to think of it as some sort of platformer, a Mario Brothers type thing, but really at its core, what it is a Pac-Man clone. You may not notice it at first. There's no maze on screen, but there is a maze. It's the one you're building. And as you go through the earth and you tunnel and you fight against those monsters, you're building the maze. You're faster in the areas that you've already opened than when you're digging through new earth. So a lot of times you build the maze in order to lure monsters to you in a certain way that makes them easier for you to kill. And that's one of the keys to scoring up big points in this game. It's a lot of fun. If you've never played it, it's worth playing. If you've got a 2600, it is a great game to add to your collection. Frogger's another game that probably doesn't need much of an introduction. You're a frog that's trying to cross the road to get to the other side. Technically speaking, you're trying to cross busy highway and treacherous waters to get back home. And there's not a whole lot as far as the concept goes. It's very basic. The game was originally going to be called Highway Crossing Frog, and they decided better of that. The game itself, though, is surprisingly fun, and it doesn't matter if the graphics, again, on the 2600 look like someone carved them on the side of a potato and then beat it to death with a hammer, because the gameplay itself is still here, and it's so awesome. Frogger is one of these games that you can easily get addicted to, even on the 2600. And everything is easily recognizable. You've got the snakes, you've got alligators, you've got your cars, your semi-trucks, your logs, everything is here, and it's all fantastic. And this game is known for challenging even the best of players. People who said they've played games their entire lives still get bogged down in a game of Frogger and will find themselves playing over and over, trying to get better and better, because it's so simple, and in its simplicity is where the difficulty really comes from. And that's why it's so great. And again, even on the 2600, the graphics may be terrible on a system like this compared to what you can find virtually anywhere else. But the gameplay is what brings you back. And the gameplay on the 2600 is as solid as ever. River Raid is one of the very first shoot-'em-ups in video game history. In fact, it might be the very first. I'm not 100% sure. It is a vertical scrolling top-down shooter in which you control an airplane trying to get from the bottom of the screen to the top. Well, or technically he's in the middle and the world is scrolling. Regardless, you're on a mission, and your mission is to blow everything away and not get blown up yourself. And that is great fun anytime you can blow stuff up, right? Now, the main things that are going to bring you down are crashing into stuff and running out of fuel. There are fuel tanks along the way that you just fly over in order to refuel, and anything that gets in your way you can pretty much blow up except for big chunks of land. For some reason, your plane cannot fly over land, so I'm guessing these are canyons that you're in the middle of. Regardless, though, there's just so much stuff happening on here. There's so many colors and so many sprites and so much action going on. This is from ACTIVISION, and part of their great ability to do so much with the Atari hardware that they were known for. And this is one of those things that makes the game a classic. I can remember when we got River Raid for our 2600, and it blew our minds. We were so used to simple games like Pinball and Frogger and things like that, and when you play River Raid, it really does change your perspective on what the console is able to do. Not only is the game a lot of fun, but the graphics are really good here. This is one of those first big steps that you can see on the system where you go, okay, alright, now I can see, let's pump some stuff out here and make some great stuff happen. And that's what Activision did, that's what this game did, and this is one of the gems of the entire console generation. Now, Burger Time is one of my favorite video games of all time, and the Atari 2600 game is a game that I played a lot as a kid. Now, it's pretty different on the 2600 compared to the way it looked in the arcade, but the gameplay is here, and again, for me, that's really where most of my interest really lies. Now, you are Chef Pepper, and you're here to make giant hamburgers, and you've got food trying to chase you down. There's stuff like pickles and sausages and eggs, and they are all here to destroy you because you are going to eat them, I guess. So the way to make a hamburger is you walk across it. That's right. Your food is gigantic and you have to walk across it in order to knock it down to the platforms below in order to make your burgers. Now, one of the neat mechanisms of this game is the way the food is stacked. If you knock loose a piece of food at the top, it will bounce down and knock the one on the level below it down, which will knock the one on the level below it down, and so on and so forth. So there's a way that you can move the pieces starting at the top to the bottom in order to get them to fall down much more easily. The problem, of course, is the food's coming at you and they want to destroy you and stop you from doing this to their giant sleeping food friends. So one of the weapons you have in your disposal is pepper, and you will pick this up from time to time. You can use it to momentarily stun your enemies and walk past them. Better yet, though, if you can catch the food on the giant piece of food that you're knocking to a platform down below, then they will fall with it. They become stunned. They can become crushed in between the different pieces of food falling down. They can get knocked out. They can be removed from the level, and then they respawn back at the top, giving you time to clear more pieces of food out of the way. Again, this game is a lot of fun. And again, it's another Pac-Man type clone where they've created a maze out of these levels and platforms, and as you move around, you're trying to clear these pieces out, fighting against these monsters, so to speak. It really does bring a new element of gameplay to the idea. And the game here on the 2600, again, the gameplay is solid. The graphics don't look as good as you're going to find anywhere else, but the gameplay is really what brings you back. And I have played this game so many times over the past couple of years, I couldn't even tell you how many times I've played this game because the gameplay is just so awesome. Another Pac-Man clone that made its way onto the 2600 is Lock and Chase. In Lock and Chase, you play a thief trying to steal all the gold bars and get away from police while shutting doors in their faces in order to keep them at bay and make your escape. Now, the game itself, again, is pretty basic, and on the 2600, all you can make are these vertical walls that will separate you from the police officers. It's very different from the arcade, and the funny thing is, I played it on the 2600 first for years before I ever found it in the arcade, and when I played the arcade version, I didn't like it as much. I like the 2600 version better. Even though it's more simple on the 2600, I like the simplicity of it. The fact that you can't do the vertical walls and you can only do the horizontal walls in order to stop the police makes the strategy different. And the game itself plays very differently, and I like the way it's open more on the map, and you have to struggle more. I think the game is actually a little more difficult, and it's a little more original in its format on the 2600. So while some people may in fact enjoy the arcade game more, and they may be disappointed that the 2600 port doesn't match the arcade game, but to me, their failure to adequately port the arcade game home made for a better game. And anybody who disagrees, you're welcome to your opinion, but give it a try. Really get in there. I know you might be upset it's not the same, and you may say the Intellivision version looks so much better and it plays more like the arcade, but really get into this one. Give it a try, because I've found that this game, in being different from the arcade, is actually in many ways so much superior. YARS Revenge is a classic on the 2600, and many people would say this is probably the finest game, although I don't quite put it in that #1 spot. It is very high on the list. YARS Revenge is a fantastic piece of gaming. The basic idea is this. There is this base that you are trying to destroy on the right side of the screen. It has a shield in front of it. Your YAR, your little insect-like spaceship, is trying to destroy the shield one piece at a time by shooting it or running into it. Once the shield is down, you use your giant cannon to destroy the base. Now you do have a little shield area in the middle that will keep you safe from any attacks that come from this base, and the base has two main attacks. One is the homing missile, and the second is this swirly disc warp cannon fire thing that comes at you. When it fires that cannon thing at you, you cannot attack it. You've got to get out of the way. But the homing missile is constantly coming at you, so you've got to get into your safe zone in the middle from time to time in order to keep from being destroyed while you are doing your attacks. It's, again, kind of a basic game, but there's a lot of strategy that goes on to the ways in which you do it. And as the game gets more difficult, there's a lot of features that get added to really ramp up the difficulty. For instance, the shield can regenerate. Different things on screen can disappear. The homing missile might disappear for a couple seconds at a time. The shield might rotate in different ways that make it difficult for you to break through to the base on the other side. Now, all of these things have names. YAR, of course, is the name of your little ship. The base that you're trying to destroy is the Tile. I'm not sure if you pronounced that correctly. The cannon you use is the Zorlon. There's a lot of weird names that have been added to this thing that I usually just say, yeah, the base, the cannon, and your insect, your bug ship. The game itself, though, is a lot of fun, and it's available to play in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. You can find it on a lot of compilations of great Atari games, and it belongs there for a reason. It's a super fun game, and it is a game that I've played a lot in my lifetime. Remember when I talked about Activision being these masterminds when it came to getting the most out of the Atari 2600? Well, Pitfall is another example of how these guys were just incredible geniuses when it came to programming on this machine. And Pitfall is another game that some people might say is the best game of all time on the 2600. And even though I don't have it in the #1 spot, it is still one of the best games ever on any system, even the 2600. Now, you are Pitfall Harry, not Indiana Jones, not Alan Quatermain, not anyone recognizable like that, wink wink, nudge nudge, but Pitfall Harry, and you are trying to get all of this treasure that's been lost throughout the jungle. And the jungle is built like a maze. You have levels on top and levels on the bottom. And going left to right will take you to another room, but going left to right on the top level doesn't take you to the same room as going left to right on the bottom level, and that's part of the maze aspect. There are dead ends, there are screens you just cannot pass, and so going up and down makes a difference on how you're going to get through this maze and try to get the different types of treasure. Along the way, you're going to run into all sorts of things: rattlesnakes, scorpions, rolling logs, fire, quicksand, crocodiles. In fact, some of the pools full of crocodiles you have to jump across by jumping on their backs and not stepping in their mouths. And I don't care how many times I try this, I always end up falling into a mouth, even though I swear I'm not touching the mouth. I'm not even close to the mouth. I'm just on the back of the crocodile. Somehow I fall in the mouth and I die, and it drives me crazy. But I still want to play this game over and over all the time because it's fantastic. A lot of the sound effects are iconic. You'll recognize some of these sounds even if you've never actually played the game, because they've been sampled and reused so many times. This game, again, it's iconic. If you have not experienced this game, you owe it to yourself to find it. In fact, this game is so good, they haven't been able to make any sort of decent update or sequel to it because you can't improve upon it. Anytime they try by updating the graphics or making a new version on a new system, or they think, hey, it's a 3D era, let's make a fully 3D roaming adventure one. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because this game is so perfect and so finely woven together that it just doesn't get much better than this. I'm going to drive people crazy with this one, but Adventure is my favorite game, my #1 pick of all time on the Atari 2600. And this is the type of game that in general I just love anyway. This is the very first action-adventure game on a video game console. And this is all about trying to get the Golden Chalice back to your home castle. Now, the game itself starts out very easy. All you have to do is get past the dragons, get into the castle, find the right key, grab the chalice, bring it home. Very simple. But the game quickly gets more and more difficult. Every time you win, you can up the difficulty and play on a harder setting, and boy, does it get hard quickly. You have to worry about things like bats, you have to worry about things like dragons, you have to worry about getting lost in the hedge maze. There's all sorts of things you have to worry about, including only being able to carry one item at a time. So if you need a specific key to get through a specific gate to get into a specific castle, then you're going to have to worry about which one you're carrying at the correct time to get through the correct door to get to the next part of your journey. You can find a sword to defeat these dragons, although, you know, even the creator of the game, Warren Robinette, who created the very first Easter egg in this video game, has said that these dragons do look like ducks. There wasn't much he could do about that. He tried very hard with what he had, but he did some incredible things with this game. For instance, the dragons and the bats. They will continue to move throughout the kingdom even when you're not on the same screen. It's something that had never been done before or thought of before. The fact that these things could still populate and move throughout the world when you're not watching. It's incredible. And just some of the things that he thought about putting in here: a bridge to get through the hedge maze, the way that you can fight the dragon by getting the sword and stabbing him, but you may also get bitten. If you get swallowed whole by the dragon, you get stuck in his belly. You may have to reset the game, or you can start over. You can get a continue, the very first continue in video games, restart at the castle, but everything you've touched and everything that's been moved has been left where it has been moved to, although any dragons you might have killed have magically come back to life. It's really intriguing to see how many things we take for granted in video games started right here in this very game. This is why it's the #1 game. This is a game that I go back to and play all the time. I love this game. Anytime there's a new flashback console, anytime there's some sort of Atari greatest hits collection, anytime there's, you know, some sort of plug and play TV device, anything like that, before I even question whether or not I might pick it up and play with it, I look to see if it has Adventure on it. Adventure is my #1 game on the Atari 2600. If you have never played this, you have to play it. You owe it to yourself. And do some research on this game. There is so much great stuff buried in the development of this game, the reception of this game, and again, the things that Robinette was able to accomplish and he brought to video games that never existed before. This game is amazing, and it's my pick for the #1 game of all time on the Atari 2600. Now, Adventures of Tron had a really weird development cycle. It started out as a port of the Intellivision game Mazatron. And you're probably thinking, Mazatron, that's nothing like Adventures of Tron. You're absolutely correct. After they started porting it over, they made a bunch of changes to it, and they decided, hey, let's go ahead and develop it into a brand new game, and let's give it a brand new title. Little did they know, though, that a year or so later, they'd have to give it a completely new title. And thus history was made with that whole debacle. But one of the neat things is when the game came out, there was also Discs of Tron. And if you had bought Discs of Tron and then you bought Adventures of Tron, you could cut out the proofs of purchase from the box, send it in, and get one of those Tron joysticks for your Atari console. But they also sold them in a 2-pack. Now, this one has obviously seen better days, but you can see here, this is actually packed with both cartridges inside, and then comes with the joystick here. Now, these, even though this is beat up and in terrible shape, this is one of my favorite collector's pieces. I love this thing. I had one of these joysticks when I was a kid, and of course it got ruined over the years because I'm an idiot, but as an adult I was finally able to track one down, and even in the terrible shape that it's in, I love having this thing. Tron has, of course, been one of my favorite things of all time, which you probably know, and you can probably tell by some of the things around me in this video. So I knew I had to include it on the list, but I wasn't going to make it #1. I know a lot of you are going to disagree with some of my picks, so feel free to leave comments about which ones you feel should have been on the list, what you think should have been #1, because I know you're not going to agree with Adventure. But you can always email me at dirt@popculturenetwork.com or dirt@thepopseed.net. And you can always leave us a voicemail message on the 24-hour voicemail line. It's area code 217-953-4025. That's a Skype voice mailbox. So you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, leave a voicemail message, and who knows, we just may use it on a future episode of the show. So, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.